Okay, we're actually going to go ahead and get started. So good afternoon and welcome. I'm Leilani Vayonga and coming to you from MetroPlan Orlando with the Community Outreach Team, and I'll be your host this afternoon. Again, thank you for attending our webinar to discuss the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. It's our 25-year vision for the region. It looks like we have about 27 or 28 people with us today. Everyone's slowly coming in, so that's wonderful. Normally, before the adoption of our 25-year plan, we're actually out in the community. We're talking with people face to face with a lot of Central Floridians about transportation, but obviously this year things are different and we have to reach out to you virtually. But what has not changed is our commitment to making sure you know that what our 2045 plan offers and that you are up to date on our planning efforts. So today's recording will be available on the MetroPlan Orlando YouTube channel after we're finished. You will find links to the YouTube live stream in the chat box located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So throughout the presentation, please feel free to share those with your family, your friends, and business networks so that they can learn about the 2045 plan as well. And engagement is so important to us, and so we want to hear from you during this webinar. There are a few ways you can participate. You can use the Q&A button on your toolbar to ask questions throughout the program, and we'll answer as many questions as possible during the question and answer session later in the agenda. You will be able to see other questions that are also coming in, and you can upvote, give them an upvote by clicking on the thumbs up icon for a question. And if you are wondering about that topic as well. We'll have question and answer session near the end of the program. And if we can't get to everyone, we'll let you know how you can contact us so that we can keep the conversation going. So onto our program for today. We have a very informative presentation for you. Our presenters today will be Ms. Cynthia Lambert, MetroPlan Orlando's Public Information Manager, and Mr. Alex Trauger, Senior Planner and Project Manager. And they will give an overview of the 2045 plan and talk about what we see ahead for Central Florida's transportation system. And they'll also talk about how we prepare for the future, including some of the parts that we really can't quite imagine right now. So remember, you can press the Q&A button on your toolbar and type your questions in throughout the presentation. Okay, Cynthia, you're up.
Thank you so much, Leilani. So we appreciate everyone taking time out of your afternoon to spend this with us. If you're not familiar with MetroPlan Orlando, who we are and what we do, we're going to start off by telling you a little bit more about our organization. So we are what you call a metropolitan planning organization. And that basically means that we are in charge of the long-term transportation vision for Central Florida. And we cover Orange, Osceola, and Seminole counties. So that's our planning area. And so when you hear us talk about things today, that is the region that we're focused on. Our board is made up of elected officials from the various counties and also representatives from probably a lot of the transportation organizations that you already know. So organizations like LINKS and FDOT and the expressway authorities and the aviation authorities. All of those folks are represented on our board. So we're the place where everybody comes together in the region to talk about what's important, to prioritize projects for federal and state funding. As you can imagine, that's a really difficult task because we have a whole lot of needs. And of course, transportation projects tend to be large and expensive, but we have a finite number of dollars. So we're not really going to get deep into the funding conversation today, but we want you to have that in the back of your mind, that funding is a very important part of the conversation when it comes to transportation planning as well. So when we talk about the different laws and things that pertain to transportation planning, we are specifically in charge of 3 what we call core products, or these are our main plans, in other words. So today we're going to be talking about our Metropolitan Transportation Plan, as Leilani already told you, and we call that MTP for short, We love our acronyms in transportation world. And a project has to be in this long-range plan to be able to receive federal and state funding. So that's why this plan is so important, because it helps our local government partners especially be able to leverage those federal and state dollars. So once a project is in the long-range plan, it gets put onto a list and ranked in priority order, and we call that our prioritized project list. And so that is essentially a waiting list for funding. Sometimes it takes years for funding to become available for a project, but once money does become available, we kind of cross over that bridge over to our short-term plan, which is our transportation improvement program. And this basically lays out all the transportation dollars that are being spent in the next 5 years. So if you're interested in specific projects or perhaps knowing what's coming soon to the area around your home or around your work, the Transportation Improvement Program is a great place for you to look. We actually have an interactive online map version where you can put in your location and see what's coming near you. So we encourage you to take a look at that if you are interested in specifics. But today we're going to keep the conversation very much at a 30,000 foot level, talking about long-term planning and some of the issues that we encounter when we are doing this planning a couple of decades into the future. But before we get into that, we want to hear from you. So we're going to launch a poll question so that you can share your opinions with us. We want to know your thoughts on the current transportation system. So as you consider this question, we want you to think about the whole system, not just cars, but also biking, walking, paratransit, bus, rail system, the whole transportation system, any way that you can get from A to B in Central Florida. So please tell us, how well do you think the Central Florida transportation system serves the needs of residents and visitors? You can go from great, serves all travelers equally well, to pretty good, where you think it serves most travelers adequately, average, serving some travelers, poor, failing to serve most travelers, or failing, no one's needs are being met. So we'll give you a few seconds to think about that and to give us your answer. Give you about 10 more seconds. I see answers still coming in. Okay, we can go ahead and close our poll. And so it looks like most of you give us about a C or so. You think we're doing average. So there's definitely room for improvement, and we would agree with you. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. How do we start that process of making things better? So we're here to talk about the year 2045. Maybe the wheels are already turning in your head. How old am I going to be in 2045? Most of the time when I throw that year out, I can see people starting to do that math in their head already. But even if perhaps you think that there's a small chance you might not be around in 2045, it's so important for us to start planning now so that we can leave a legacy, a good legacy for future generations, our kids and our grandkids. Transportation projects often take so long to come to fruition that we really have to start planning today to make a difference in tomorrow's transportation system. So we're going to talk about some of the challenges and opportunities in long-range planning. And when we're talking about our 2045 plan, we want it to accomplish a lot of different things, and we're going to share some of those with you today. The first thing is that we want the plan to really have something for everyone. So transportation affects quality of life for every single person here in Central Florida. So from the very old to the very young and everywhere in between, the transportation system needs to work for you, regardless of ability. So that is one of our goals. The challenge is here, when we look at the transportation system and all the things that need to be done, we know that here in Central Florida, our population is growing. And in fact, it's expected to grow quite a bit more by the year 2045, about 46%. So that means another 1 million people will be living here in Central Florida in the year 2045. So as you can imagine, that puts a big strain on our transportation system. But in addition to the people that live here and are raising their families here, we have a whole lot of people that love to come to visit Central Florida to make memories here as well. And so when you look at the trends in our visitor numbers over the past couple of decades, our visitorship has actually gone up about 76%. And so in 2018, we had about 75 million visitors that came to Central Florida. Of course, with the current situation with the pandemic, the tourism industry has been really severely impacted by this. But in the long term, when we're looking over the next couple of decades, we really expect to see that rebound and for people to start traveling here again as soon as it's safe to do so. So we do need to continue planning, not only for the people that live here, but for the people that come to visit as well. So we know that we live in this, wonderful world-class community, but the question is, how do we build a world-class transportation system to match that? We know that in a lot of places in our 3-county area, it's just not feasible to widen roads anymore. Whether that's because there's no physical space or because the community impacts would be too severe. There's a lot of different reasons. So that means that we have to make efficient use of the space that we have on the transportation system today. So when we look at roads, of course, are a very integral part of our transportation system. But if we focus on just those, it doesn't work. We know that it's not just about moving cars, it's about moving people. So as we look to try and provide different transportation options so that people can choose how they would like to get around Central Florida, we really, it's very important to us to be able to provide those options. When we're looking at making an efficient use of space, this graphic here illustrates what we can do with the physical space that's the width of one car lane. So if you're looking at moving people by vehicle, you can get about 600 to 1,600 people per hour through. If all those people are on bikes, you can get about 7,500 people per hour in the same physical area. If all of those people are on foot, about 9,000 people per hour can go through. And if we're moving people by transit, which is a bus or a train, we could fit a whole lot more people, about 10,000 to 25,000 people per hour. So we know that public transportation does help us make the most efficient use of our space. And that is going to be a key piece of the system as we move forward in the next couple of decades. But really, a balanced transportation system would have all these things that you see on your screen. So it's really just about finding a good way for us to all share the space, no matter how we travel. So let's talk a little bit about congestion. What exactly causes congestion? If you think about how you get to work, do you drive alone? Most of us do. And if you think about it, one person in one car, when you're going nowhere fast, it's not that we're stuck in congestion, but really we are the congestion. So we're taking up all this space and there's just kind of one of us moving along. And as we've already talked about, we're expecting our residents and visitor numbers to grow. And so we don't really expect congestion to ever completely go away. But what we can do is focus on the reliability of your trip. In other words, we want to make sure that your trip takes the same amount of time every time. So if your commute to work is 20 minutes, it takes you 20 minutes every day of the week. It's not that, on Tuesday it takes you 20 minutes, but on Thursday morning it takes you 45 minutes. So that is a big cause of frustration for a lot of commuters. And so our plan focuses on improving the performance of the system so that we can try to make those travel times a lot more reliable and minimize that driver frustration. And when we talk about commuting, we know it's really important to help people get to work and to help them connect to their jobs. And so if you think about some of the people that you might depend on every day. Maybe it's the person who takes care of your child, or the cashier at the grocery store. Maybe it's the home health aide who takes care of your parent. All of these people, are essential, right? We really heard the term essential worker thrown around a lot during this pandemic. But many of these folks are, they're employed, they're working really hard in our community, but they're still struggling to make ends meet. And the United Way puts out a really powerful report. It's called the ALICE report. And that stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained. And it talks about the people in our community who are employed, but they're still struggling to make ends meet. And here in Central Florida, about half of the families in our region fall into this category. They're just one, financial problem away from complete disasters for their family. And of course, this is from a pre-pandemic report. I'm sure the situation has worsened now during this pandemic, when the economy has really had a rough time of it. So, for these families, it's so important that we keep them in mind when we plan, so that they can have affordable access to jobs, to healthcare, to education, to grocery stores. And often public transportation, like bus and rail, helps these folks that we depend on be able to get to work. So to be able to have a good transit system, we really need those buses and trains to be more frequent, to be reliable, and to be convenient, and go to places where people want to go. Now, safety is so important. You should have the expectation to be able to get from one place to another safely. We never think when we leave our homes that we're going to get hurt or that we're going to die in a crash, and yet it happens every single day. So I want to share some very eye-opening statistics with you. When we look at the past 5 years, for which we have good crash data, 1,382 people have died on our roads. If you think about how many people that is, to put it in context for you, if you've ever been to the Walt Disney Theater at the Dr. Phillips Center, 1,382 is about half the capacity of that huge theater. Those are just unacceptable numbers. And when you look at the number of people that have gotten hurt in traffic crashes in our region in that same time period, the number is even more staggering. About 157,488 people have been injured in crashes. And so that is more than the populations of the cities of Apopka, St. Cloud, and Altamont Springs combined, with people to spare. So long term, we really want to see traffic deaths and injuries eliminated. But unfortunately, there's no easy fix for this issue. It really has to be tackled from a lot of different angles. And so traditionally, transportation engineers have had this goal to move cars quickly, no matter where the road was or what type of road it was. But this is in direct conflict with keeping people safe. And so we're seeing a mindset shift, where we're redefining our perceptions of safety. And so we know that slowing things down makes things truly safer. But the question is, are we willing to accept the trade-offs? Maybe it does take us a little bit longer if we're traveling to get to where our destinations, but are we willing as a society to accept a little bit longer travel time in exchange for people being more safe, for having fewer crashes, fewer injuries, fewer deaths? So are we willing as a society to accept that? And are you personally willing to accept that? So it's food for thought, something to think about. Of course, we can't talk about the year 2045 without briefly touching on technology. This is a tough one. We have no idea what kind of technology is going to be out there in the year 2045. It probably hasn't even been thought of yet. And so how do we plan our system for this giant unknown? Well, We know that the one thing we can count on is change. Things will change with technology. And this is going to affect a couple of different things. It'll affect the infrastructure side of transportation. So we can work on making sure that the way that we build our transportation system can communicate with all this new technology, whether you're in a vehicle or walking or biking, and perhaps the technology is through your phone. So we can work on the infrastructure side of things. We also have to work on the human side of things and making sure that, for example, the people that service our traffic signals are up to date on all this changing technology, so that as we're upgrading our systems, that our folks who maintain these systems can keep up as well. So that's a whole new skill set that many of us are having to acquire. So we know that technology can help with a lot of things, and we're really hoping that it's going to make a big difference in that safety issue. But technology can't solve all of our transportation problems. So we're going to continue to work on that. And now that I've given you a little bit of an overview of some of the challenges and opportunities, I'm going to turn it over to Alex Trauger, who is the project manager for our 2045 plan. He's going to talk a little bit more about our technical process. Alex?
Great. Thank you so much, Cynthia. So we kicked off the technical process for the 2045 years ago. And we began that with scoping, really thinking through kind of having that end in mind of the planning process, but really working with the Florida Department of Transportation, as well as all of our local government partners on developing a trend future land use forecast. So really looking at, what are our trend population and employment forecasts, but also, where are those activity centers, where are those developments planned to take place. And a lot of that has to do with the consistency with our local government comprehensive plans. And a lot of that work with DOT, feeds into some of their planning models. And we'll talk about that more later on. But this data development process also included really the preparation of an existing conditions analysis and an aerial profile. So where we can kind of look outward with that in mind, and really knowing our trend in those current conditions. We began establishing goals and objectives with our MTP working group, our board, as well as our advisory committees. Right now, we are on step 3. That's that multimodal assessment of regional transportation needs. This step really helps us identify opportunities, needs, but opportunities and solutions. It screens those solutions environmentally, looks at their public health impact, and prioritizes those projects based on regional need and potential impact, and really their consistency with our board's goals, objectives, and key indicators. The final product in our process is a cost feasible plan of transportation investments. Those are policies, those are funding programs, and those are projects. All state funding. Our board plans to take action on this at their December 9th meeting later this year. But before we adopt, and really at every step of the long-range planning process, there are multiple ways for you to engage in the process. And right now, that's from the comfort of your desk, from your computer, from your smartphone. So please stay tuned, follow along, because there are plenty of ways for you to participate. But as we look at our planning approach, and for those who have participated with us in this process before, and really for those who are new, I believe it's important to really acknowledge a paradigm shift. Cynthia started to mention that earlier, but there's been a shift in the planning process. And I think that's really evident in our 2045 plans methodology. Previous plans evaluated roadway volume to capacity ratios, which basically looked at how many cars could physically fit those peak hours. This process primarily yielded capacity needs and really identified those roadway widening projects. But by the virtue of our methodology, we acknowledge that some of our past processes did not fully capture really the essence of complete streets and the surrounding land use context sensitivity. This plan is going to do a much better job of accomplishing that. And that's really done through a lot of our new planning processes. And that's going to be done by, providing, the plan is really all about providing a diverse set of options to meet those changing traveler needs and desires that Cynthia mentioned. And we're using a comprehensive set of performance indicators and a performance-based planning process to really identify those needs and to make sure they align with our regional goals and objectives. So like I said, some of you have been with us, so you but really given the complexity of the regional transportation system in each mode of travel, we are using several different approaches to analyze multimodal needs and really account for people walking and cycling, using mass transit, automobiles, but also considering the movement of freight, goods, and services. And if you want to hear more about that needs assessment methodology, I suggest checking out our working group videos on our YouTube channel. A lot of good information in there where we talk about it at a high level, but we also get into the details. Another part of this future-focused needs assessment is using a scenario planning process. So someone asked that question, why scenario planning? Previous plans had done a point forecast process, but scenario planning is ultimately futures that our region, Central Florida, may face through 2045, and really attempting to understand the implication of those futures within our metropolitan transportation planning process. As I said before, traditionally, we've taken those existing population, employment, and development trends, their rates of growth really over the past years, and forecasted them outward, and we really followed along an upward trend line. And we tended to assume that travel behaviors and destinations were going to be relatively the same. This worked in the past, but it really didn't. It's really not going to suffice as a methodology any longer. And today's approach, which I think is so relative to our current circumstances, is really about trying to better understand changes, risks, and disruption, rather facing, and really how this will impact our plan. How we think about investment, how we think about strategies, how do we pursue those to really accomplish goals and objectives. But when we look at the 2045 plan, we're considering 4 alternative futures. Traditional trends, that's our traditional process, but one to keep in mind, this one implies the continuation of those pre-COVID behaviors. Those are really our historic patterns of growth. And we have another alternative, which is called tech transformations. This scenario is with our region really taking advantage of and really embracing available transportation innovations and what that can mean to other key drivers, and how that affects ownership models, how that affects housing choices and employment choices. Another scenario looks at climate consequences, and this is really our high scenario, which is driven by in-migration patterns that are caused by sea level rise and really other natural phenomena. So higher growth coming to the region, and that growth is going to occur in higher intensities along really key activity centers, as well as some of our premium transit corridors. Our last, but really not least, so relative alternative here is disruption dilemmas. The scenario really explores long-term shifts and those really long-term declines and slower growth rates than we've previously experienced. And those are slower than trend rates is what we're talking about here. So this not so optimistic future, in our planning process really helps us provide that full range of alternatives in our scenario planning process. So we have a trend, a technology forward future, a high growth, and a lower than trend alternative future. We're coming up with strategies and priority projects for the 2045 plan, like we always have. But I think the difference here is that we're trying to take a much more far-sighted look at projects and strategies, and which one of those are going to be most successful across our full range of alternatives. So we are prepared for some of those risks, and we are prepared for really some of those uncertainties that we may face, really no matter what the future has in store for us. And, as I'm talking about, no matter what the future has in store for us, it's really a great transition to goals and objectives, because that's really what these are. And the 2045 plan is guided by 5 overarching goals that you can see here on the slide. And together they really advance our board's vision, safely and efficiently moves people and goods through a variety of options that supports our region's vitality. So these goals provide a compass and really guide the direction and focus of every other element of our long-range planning process that we're talking about and working through today. It's really a way of defining what we want to achieve and how to get there. And I think this plan, with an implementation focus, takes these goals and objectives and will identify those projects, those strategies, and those policies to really help us get there. We establish these goals by building on previous long-range plans, and we refine them based on really a comprehensive review of federal, state, as well as local plans, while also considering the input from the public, our board, our advisory committees, as well as the MTP working refining and establishing these goals and objectives. They are, as you can see, providing a safe and secure transportation system for all users, leveraging innovative solutions to optimize system performance, enhancing communities and lives through improved access to opportunities, protecting and preserving our region's public health and environmentally sensitive areas. And last, and really a key focus, as we're seeing in a lot of our public opinion research, is, how does the transportation network really support economic prosperity, and how can our board and through the work that we do help do that through strategic transportation investment. So each of these broad goal areas includes a comprehensive set of measurable objectives. I don't have time to talk about that here today, but for more information really about this step, as well as for more information technical plan, you can check out our 2045 page of the website and look up the technical documents for review. But before you do that, I'm going to hand things back over to Cynthia, because I think we have another poll question. Thanks.
We do. Thanks, Alex. So now that you've heard about our goals for the 2045 plan, we want to know from you, which of these goals do you think is the most important to you personally? So we will go ahead and launch our second poll, and we will ask for you to give this some thought and then to give us your opinions. So again, which of the goals that you've heard about is most important to you, and to remind you what those were. There's safety and security, and this is all about a transportation system that reduces crashes, injuries, and fatalities. There's reliability and performance, and this is about a transportation system that gives you reliable travel times and improves the system using technology. Access and connectivity. This will ensure that people can connect to the places that they need to go. Health and environment, using our transportation system to support public health and to preserve our environmental areas. And then investment and economy. So a transportation system that is well maintained and supports our region's economy. So if you'll take a moment, think about that and give us your response. We'll give you a few seconds to do so. Okay, I see we've still got some responses coming in. We'll give you about another 10 to 15 seconds or so to finish deciding. Okay, we can go ahead and close our poll. And so it looks like access and connectivity is the most important to our attendees here. That's interesting. You all agreed with the folks that were in our session yesterday evening. So very good. We always like to hear from you on what you're thinking so that we can make sure and incorporate public input into our planning process. And so along the lines of public input, after this session, you will be receiving an email from us, and it is going to have a link to a short Surveymonkey survey. It should take you only about 5 minutes to fill that out, but we ask you to please take those 5 minutes. It's really important to us that we hear from you. We're going to ask you some little bit harder questions than you answered during our polls today. So we're going to ask you to actually take those objectives and rank them in order of importance to you. So not just to tell us what your most important is, because one of the things that we know and we think about is that all these things are so important. So how do we decide which one is most important? And then we'll ask you about what are the top 3 things that you want to see improved or that you think could make the biggest difference in improving our transportation system over the next couple of decades. And we're also going to ask you about your vision for the system. So please be on the lookout for that email and let us know your opinions through that Surveymonkey survey. If you have enjoyed learning about transportation planning today and you want to dig even deeper, we have some more programs coming up and we invite you to join us. So next week, 1 week from today at 1:30, we are going to be having a health and environment webinar. So if you're passionate about public health, the environment, or resiliency, this program is going to be for you. So it's going to be more technically based, much more than our conversation today. But it's really going to dig deep into how the 2045 plan is incorporating these things, because transportation planning hasn't really traditionally incorporated a lot of these things. So this is something new and exciting for us. So we're happy to share how we're doing that with you. And then on September 1st, we have a fun program called Future Fest for you. This program is going to be all about those different scenarios that Alex talked about. So we're going to look at these different versions of the future, and we're going to really dig deep into what does that mean and how can the region prepare for all these different versions of the future. So if you have to choose just one of these programs, I encourage you to sign up for Future Fest so you can take a look at our offerings and get the registration links at the URL that's on the screen, metroplanorlando.org/register. So at this time, I will hand it over to Leilani.
Great. Thank you so much, Cynthia and Alex. What an informative and eye-opening presentation. Now we're here at the time where we will be asking we'll be taking questions. To submit a question, please go ahead and use the Q&A button on your toolbar and type it in there. Remember, you can also see questions that have already been submitted. I see that we're actually getting some right now. You can upvote, which is add a thumbs up to any question that you're also wondering about as well. And if you would rather ask your question aloud, maybe it's just a little bit too long and you don't want to try writing it out or something like that, we'll reserve time for that after we work through some of the written questions. And I'm going to start with these questions as I have them queued up. And while Cynthia and Alex are answering those, you can go ahead and add your questions to the list. And it looks like we have an attendee, and he's wondering what are some of the best ways or things that they can do as residents of Central Florida area to help implement these 2045 goals and also help us reach the funding required.
Right. So to answer that, that's a great question and a tough one, and I wish we had another hour to kind of go through the details on each. And the reason I say that is, each objective, like I said, it's kind of that it is measurable, it is tangible. We will be developing strategies, as part of this process, to provide, further guidance on how to do that. But I would, have to provide, specific example, as we look at, as it pertains to, some of our safety objectives, especially as it, relates to Vision Zero. You can do your part, as a user, on the system, to be mindful, to be not to be distracted, to potentially slow down, to really be kind of that, safe road user. When we look at some of our reliability objectives, those help guide investment on our part, to make sure that we are, purchasing and procuring the right equipment, to kind of meet those reliability needs. So that's what, in the reliability section. As it relates to our, access and connectivity goals and some of those objectives, as a resident, ride the bus, use public transportation, use an alternative mode other than the single occupant vehicle. That would really help, address some of our goals at an individual level. Taken individually, but a lot of them help guide us organizationally in the work that we do as we prioritize projects, as we fund programs, and as we provide direction to our board and our other advisors in our planning process. So I think it's objectives specific, but we will be, as we implement the plan, after we adopt the plan, be identifying kind of an implementation guide and looking at strategies to really help us grow and accomplish that regional vision. Sorry for the long-winded response, but I hope that helps.
I'll jump in too and speak a little bit to the funding part of that question. Transportation funding is so complicated, but yet right now it's also a little bit simple at the same time, right? Because a lot of our transportation comes from gas tax. And gas tax is a declining revenue source for transportation. If we look at even the federal piece of the gas tax, that has not gone up since 1993. So we're really a little bit outdated as to how we look at funding transportation. When we look at the shift in technology to even electric vehicles, electric vehicles don't pay gas tax at all. So they're not paying to drive on our transportation system, and yet they're putting wear and tear on the roads. So we really need to look, and it's not just here in our region, but really kind of across the country, and figure out a better funding model for transportation. So at the federal, at the state, and at the local level, it's going to take policy changes at those three levels to really address transportation funding.
Thank you for those responses. We have another question from an attendee. How does the 2045 plan help set priorities for the region?
Right, that's really one of the key aspects, especially as it relates to our long range planning process, and it really does just that. Those goals and objectives I mentioned, serve as policy guidance to us as MetroPlan Orlando staff, but we implement that and administer that process through using what we call a performance-based or really kind of a data-driven process. So we're using information that we know is proven, kind of like that evidence-based process, to make sure that we're advancing those projects. And that's more important than ever, especially as part of our federal certification, that we show and prove that the investments that we are making in transportation infrastructure and services are helping us accomplish our goals and objectives, but also those that are set upon us by Congress.
Thank you, Alex. We have another attendee who he said hello and good afternoon. What are some of the largest obstacles MetroPlan Orlando expects to meet in realizing its 25-year plan?
Great question. We talked about some of those today, some of those big challenges, but really going back to the funding piece, we have so many transportation needs. And not nearly the amount of funding to be able to bring all those needs to address all those needs, and bring these solutions to a reality. So I would say that's probably our one biggest challenge. Alex, I don't know if you want to add it all to some of the other.
Yeah, I would say outside of the funding piece, having a vision and having a plan and priorities help, especially when funding can be used to implement and expedite. But funding aside, as a planner and technically speaking, I would say it's really those individual, human household decisions that are made as it relates to employment as it relates to housing selection, as it relates to ownership and active use of our transportation system. So, we're using models and other tools to try to replicate and hope that at certain levels, our transportation infrastructure and other services, especially transit and other, active transportation, bicycle, pedestrian, trail type infrastructure is used. And I think that really helps, our process is seeing that use. And I think that also helps the policy side as it relates to funding is seeing that use. But I think that's one of our greatest challenges is, transportation is really a means to an end. It's A to B, it's that arc between home and work, between, work and other activities. And, we're up against, an existing built environment, but we have 20 years and, 1 million new people coming. And I think our role is really trying to, find the best place for those 1 million new residents. So, so our investments can be strategic, not so that we are, up against or, trying to mitigate away from a land use or other type of decision that is outside of my wheelhouse and outside of the authority of the MetroPlan Orlando board. Everything outside the curb.
Thank you. Okay, it looks like we have a couple of COVID questions that I'll try to bunch it into one fully loaded question, but our attendees are asking, as working at home during COVID-19 has taken some stress off of the transportation system, are there any plans to work with employers and residents to encourage ongoing working at home? And what's the best way to support transit safely and funding for transit, especially during the current pandemic?
So, Cynthia, do you want to start there, or do you want me to?
Sure. I was just going to start off by, kind of speaking to these really interesting patterns that we've seen from a whole lot of folks working from home these past few months. It's had a huge effect on our transportation system. I think the industry is kind of waiting with bated breath to see, is this going to be a long-term thing? Looking a couple decades into the future, how much of that shift to work from home is going to truly be long-term and take those cars off the road. So I think a lot of that remains to be seen. We're watching that very closely, but teleworking or telecommuting, another way to say work from home, we've always promoted that really as an organization and with our partners as well as a transportation demand management strategy. And we can truly see that it does work. These past few months, it makes a huge difference. And so maybe it just, takes something this unexpected as a pandemic to encourage employers to actually think about that a little bit more.
Right, and technically speaking, we are including and considering that type of disruption in our process as part of our disruption dilemma. Higher rates of home-based work, so that how that impacts peak travel.
Alex, your mic is cutting out a little bit.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, if maybe you want to switch your mic to just your microphone.
I'll do that. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Great. Sorry about that. So technically, we're encapsulating that in the plan, making sure that we're considering that as part of the process. But to piggyback on what Cynthia said, there are plans to work with employers and residents to encourage this. DOT has a commuter services program called Rethink Your Commute, catchy and true. So I suggest you, type that into a search engine, check it out. That is their charge, is to, help us accomplish our goals through those demand management strategies, including telework and getting people to use transit as well. Strategies that help the transportation system, move more reliably.
Okay, so there was towards the end, I had asked, I know that was a very loaded question. Towards the end, one of our attendees asked, what's the best way to support transit safely and funding for transit, especially during the current pandemic? So attendee, she loves transit. She supports it. She's just wondering what's the best way to support it, support cause and doing it safely. What's the best way you think that would be?
I'm by no means a transit, safety or public health expert, so I would only be guessing, in all honesty, and attempting to answer that question. I know our partners at Lynx, our transit operator, as well as are following guidance to, provide as clean, as a sanitary as a system as possible. So I think it's, taking that personal responsibility. But, as it relates to the operators, I believe they're doing everything they can, at least based on the guidance they're receiving. Cynthia, anything? Or I wish we had a member from Lynx. I was scrolling through our participant list to see if we could kind of bring someone into the discussion. It doesn't appear that we have anyone from our operator. But we'll follow up with Theo to see if we can get a better response to you, but that's at least off the cuff where my mind's at.
Yeah, and I think you really kind of hit it on the head earlier when you said writing is one of the best things you can do, because if, our regional leaders see that there's a need and there's a want there, they will certainly be encouraged to support Lynx even more, and Sunrail as well. And so speaking to your elected officials is a great idea as well.
Great. We have another question from an attendee, and they're asking, what positive change in transportation can we see within the next 10 to 15 years in our regional landscape? So what type of positive change in transportation can we see?
10 to 15 years. We're talking midterm here, Alex.
Yeah,
Go for it.
Yeah, if you're looking midterm, I would see billion-dollar investment, multimodal investment. As Cynthia mentioned, in our transportation improvement program. Those are projects that have been in the hopper and have been vetted for decades in some cases. So we'll see the completion of some of our regions. Most strategic, interregional and statewide infrastructure like I-4 and the Wekiva Parkway. A lot of, other, transit services are obviously, contingent on that funding picture. So, we have those needs. We recognize them. That's a need. We'll see a lot of gaps, regional trail gaps being closed. There's obviously some uncertainty. 6 to 8 months ago, I would have said, some high-speed rail connections. Obviously, that there's some disruption in that market right now. So I'm being optimistic and saying maybe that's still in our cards. So I'm an optimist on that kind of interregional connectivity front. But I would pay attention to our prioritized project lists and the TIP. That's really kind of shovel in the ground, projects that are going to really make some change.
Yeah, we're definitely going to see some of those big mega projects wrapping up. We're not going to know what to do with ourselves when I-4 construction's over.
Okay, I think we'll be able to take about 2 or 3 more questions. I'm just trying to, get all of these in. We have a question. Does the 2045 plan take into account potential changes to land use patterns, such as increasing density and a great mixture of uses within neighborhoods?
Yeah, short answer, yes. And that's part of our future land use forecasting. MetroPlan Orlando board does not have land use authority, but we do coordinate directly with our local government partners on developing those forecasts. Each of the scenarios has some form of varying future land use based on each scenario's narrative. Obviously, the trend is the trend, but obviously we're going to see, even within our trend forecast, higher growth along specific corridors, especially some of our U.S. Kind of major arterial roads. But there's also some other variants, especially in that climate consequences scenario that I mentioned. And we'll be talking a lot more about this and showing some maps as well at Future Fest. So, but that's the short answer. It's part of our process because land use and, like I said, what happens outside the curb has direct impact and implication to building, operating, and maintaining a transportation system.
Yeah, and if we can increase our densities, that does a lot to support public transportation as well.
Great. Talking about public transportation, an attendee wants to know, are most bus routes every 15 minutes? Is this a feasible goal?
Right now, most bus routes are not every 15 minutes, at least here in our region, but that is certainly something that we would love to be able to reach. Is it a feasible goal? I think absolutely. Lynx does have some high frequency routes that are very close to that right now, but to see it over the entire system would be a great goal.
Right, and on the technical side, we are identifying those corridors that can support that level of transit frequency. So we're identifying those corridors at varying different levels of service and identifying costs for that as well, because I hate to always bring funding into the picture, but our needs and our desires are infinite in many cases, but funding is very finite. And what our job is to try to be good stewards and spend that money based on our goals and objectives and based on the performance indicators and targets that we've set.
Great. Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. So an attendee is asking, when will Sunrail extend to the airport? He's being playful and saying, try to answer this without saying funding.
Not possible. But Sunrail to the airport is our board's, number one transit priority for Sunrail as far as expansion goes. All along when we were working on trying to get Sunrail to the region, we always imagined this first line as just that, one line that you could then grow off of and put arms and legs on, if you will. And the extension to the airport is a high priority for a lot of our board members. Can't give you a specific date yet, though. Alex, I don't know.
Yeah, the only thing I would say without pivoting to funding would be partnership. When we've looked to seeing other connections to the airport, the question is by what mode, by what service, by what operator. And I think in answering those questions, I think there are other public-private partnership opportunities. Kind of going back to my high-speed rail to other mega regions of the state, that could provide an opportunity. Back to funding, someone has to pay the bill, capital and operations and maintenance. So I think that's an important consideration as we look about providing that connection, to the airport. One, feasibility, but two, kind of long-term, financial viability.
Okay, great. Thank you, Alex and Cynthia, for answering those questions.
And I'm sorry, Leilani, before we move on, I would be remiss to say, there is a bus connection, providing, an express route from Sunrail, to the airport. So, while there is a connection there, it is not rail-based, but the rubber tire is providing that express service. You can check that out on the GoLinks website.
Okay. Thanks for sharing that last of your input, Alex. Well, it looks like we're going to wrap things up. We hope that you all learned something this afternoon. If you did learn something, maybe you can use that raise hand feature to let us know. You just tap on it and we'll start to see Hands come up. Okay, I see some coming up. So that's great. Thank you. If you have questions that weren't addressed here or you want more information, don't hesitate to contact us. Remember, this webinar video will be available on our YouTube channel, so you can review and you can also share on your social media channels. As we mentioned, you will receive a follow-up email from us with a short survey and links to information about the 2045 plan beyond what you heard here today. You're also welcome to ask a question or comment on what you heard today through our mtp@metroplanorlando.org email box, or even the good old US Postal Service. So again, we appreciate you taking the time to join us in this discussion about our transportation system, and we look forward to seeing you at some of our other future programs. Thank you.